Hello, and welcome to Grey Matter Talks Tech, a podcast for IT pros and developers looking to gain insights and tips from industry experts. In this episode, it's all about human risk management. I'm your host today, Andrew Spink. I'm a cybersecurity account manager here at Grey Matter. And I'm joined today by our cybersecurity solutions specialist, Scott Harrison, who no doubt have heard on our other security podcast episodes. And I'm also delighted to welcome Javvad Malik from KnowBe4. So welcome, guys.
Thank you.
No worries. So before we start, as you're new to the podcast, Javvad, please could you provide a quick intro into who you are at KnowBe4?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks again for inviting me, and thank you to the listeners for being here. I've been working at KnowBe4 for about 6.5 years, the longest I've ever been at any company, actually. I've worked in cybersecurity my entire career. But at KnowBe4 specifically, I work on the human risk side of things, and I do research, and I go out and speak about it and try to convince people to take their human risk seriously. So I suppose that's me in a nutshell.
Absolutely. Well, we'll go through our questions. We're going to open up, first of all, with the one for both of you today, but we'll start with you, Javvad. What are the common kind of human risks businesses face today?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, because nearly everything you do in business that involves a human has an element of risk to it. Whether it be a cyber risk or not, it's different. But we see a lot of times, if someone inputs a figure wrong accidentally, that's a risk to organizations. So how do you prevent that from happening? If someone falls victim to a social engineering scam, someone saying, "Oh, I'm your boss, I need you to buy £3,000 in gift cards and send me the numbers," that's a risk as well. So, there are lots and lots of risks. And wherever there's an interaction of human to human or human and technology, there's a chance that process could break down. So all of that is in the realm of risk. Unlike technology, where once you program it to operate within certain parameters, it will repeat that quite effectively or quite dependably time and time again. But humans being humans, sometimes you're tired, sometimes you're distracted, sometimes you're overworked. All these things come into play. And so there is a risk at every point. So I don't think there's only one risk, or I don't think there's only a couple of risks, but it's something that we need to look at the macro level at a bit more closely.
Absolutely. Scott, what would you say with regards to the human risks that businesses face?
Yeah, I would agree with Javvad around you can't really pin it on one particular area. Every bit of it, whether it be social engineering, privileged access mismanagement, or even poor onboarding or offboarding practices, because you need as much preparedness as you do at the beginning, as even if you're leaving a business as well. I think if you look at what's been prominent this year, I definitely think insider threats has been top of the agenda. We've seen from a vendor this week that someone internally was convinced into being given a bit of money by the hacking group Lapsus, and was basically told, "Okay, we'll give you this money if you give us access." He was like a developer for this vendor, and they provided screenshots. It wasn't actually anything very critical. All they showed was some dashboards. So everything, humans are humans. They will behave as humans do. They will be tempted by, if they're got personal difficulties in their own lives and they need that money, of course they're going to be tempted into doing that. So this way you now start to need to think about compartmentalizing things, but the whole thing is a risk. Completely agree with Javvad.
Absolutely. Okay, well, again, to both of you, are there any major incidents that, we might have seen in the news that showcase human risks and the lessons that we need to learn from them? Maybe we'll go with you first this time, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, rather than go for the known ones, because it's been said many times already around JLR and also the Max and Spencer attack, there are things that are away from this shore that have happened, which I think are very critical in terms of the industry that was affected. So there was an attack, a social engineering attack against the airline Qantas by the hacker group Scattered Spider. These are the ones I just mentioned them, but they're coming up yet again. They posed as help desk employees, and they even went as far as bypassing two-factor authentication to cause a breach. And that's, if we look at the others, it's breach. But supermarket supply chain is one thing, but an airline and the thought of the bigger danger potential to that, potentially even terrorism comes into the thought process. It puts into perspective, it doesn't matter. I think Qantas are quite big, but at the same time, the other standing value, it doesn't matter how big you are. If you've got a gap or someone does become a victim, then that awareness needs to be there. I'm sure Javad's got many different ones, many different use cases that I have been on the vendor side and many different studies as well.
No, I think that's a great one, and I'm glad you steered away from the common ones, because I think we're all talking about those and hearing about those, and probably everyone's sick the most recent ones. But I'd like to go back a year or so where there was an employee at Reddit, I believe, and they got MFA bombed, where basically their phone was getting the MFA notifications, and then they got a message from HR about there being an issue with their contract, and they had to follow a link and log in, and basically they gave away their credentials to the attacker. But what was really interesting in that, and the lesson was that, is that as soon as they'd done it, they thought, you know what, there's something not quite right here. I shouldn't have done that. And they reported it to their IT team. And then they were able to lock down their account. And so I think we understand that risks happen. People will get fooled. They'll overlook things. They'll make mistakes. And we can't always prevent that. And that's not a bad thing, as long as they are still open about it and they can reach out to their security team, their tech team, their boss, whoever they need to tell, and not be afraid that now they're going to get into trouble or they're going to be shamed or anything like that. And so you can actually minimize the impact that can have. I'm reminded of this story from the early 1900s where there was a con man, André Poisson. I think he was in France, and he hatched a scheme to sell the Eiffel Tower. So he had no authority to do so, but he gathered a bunch of local business people, and he said, well, the government doesn't want to maintain it. It's not in with the architecture of the rest of the city, so who wants to buy the Eiffel Tower? And one person said, I'll buy it, and he handed over 70,000 francs, and the con man just fled town. But the person who was the victim was so ashamed, he didn't go to the police, because he said, they just laugh at me. He goes, they won't believe me, or they'll just say I'm stupid. So he didn't report it. And the con man actually returned to France, and he repeated the con and resold the Eiffel Tower to another group of victims before he fleeing the country. The major lesson from that, and the Reddit person, and for any organization, is we all got to make mistakes at some point, but it's so important that you report it and put some sunlight on it. Otherwise, you give these criminals a chance to attack again and again and, cause more and more damage.
Absolutely. Fascinating story there. I've never heard that one before. That's really good to hear. And I'm not surprised that you tried it again. So Javvad, my next question, I think aiming at yourself, what is human risk management and how is it different from cybersecurity awareness training?
That's a great one. And I think human risk management is kind of a newish term. Over the last year or so, year and a half, it's been in the market. And so there's a bit of confusion as to how it differs from the old school cyber awareness training. And the fundamental difference is, historically, the answer to every human error was, let's give people more training. And it kind of went down the route of the beatings will continue until morale improves. So people choosing a weak password, give them a half-hour training module. People plugging in a USB drive they shouldn't, give them a half-hour training module. That was kind of like the be-all and end. HRM, or human risk management, is more of a layered approach where you're blending the technical capabilities you have with the training and awareness and the culture that you can build to significantly reduce risk in a measurable way. So, for example, if we see phishing as a problem that comes into emails, well, okay, we have email controls. What can we do there to make that better? Do we pull in some threat intelligence there? Do we have some cloud email security offerings that we could take advantage of to actually reduce the number of phishing emails that get through to the user's inbox? Then after that, yes, you have an education piece, you have the awareness piece that says like, okay, look out for these kinds of messages. But then what you need to do beyond that is you need to provide people with the tools and the culture to empower them to actually report these things in an easy way and in a way that is free from blame or free from fear of repercussions. Because I think that's one thing that really prevents people. I already touched upon that. Like, we need to give people an easy way to report these. And so the awareness training part is only there to just say like, that looks fishy and I'm going to send it off. And anything beyond that is sometimes wasted effort. It's a bit like when you're on the underground and you hear the sign, hear them saying like, if you see something, say something. What you'll never hear them say is, well, if you see a bag unattended, go and look at the wires. If there's a red and a green and a blue wire and they're going into a clock device that is timing down, then grab pliers and cut. We don't do that, do we? We just say, like, if you see something, just say something and someone who is trained will come and look at it. And that's really what we want to get people to that point of. So that's as far as awareness should go. And then you have the empowerment. You say, here's how easy it is to report it. You don't need to raise a ticket or anything. Click this button and someone will investigate it for you. And then finally, we need to look at where we can integrate with some of our other controls out there to say, like, okay, someone's done something maybe they shouldn't have. So EDR will flag if someone says download something that they shouldn't do. Rather than just quietly close it off, you can use that as actually a training moment for the person that's downloading and said, hey, you downloaded this, we've quarantined it because, and if you think this is wrong, then do this, or here's a little trainer video for that. So what you do, you close the loop on everything so they understand that my actions have these consequences and this is where I was right, or this is where I was wrong, or this is where I was unsure. And so you create an overall culture supported by the technology and those people around you to help people make better decisions and reduce that overall risk in a far more measurable manner.
Excellent. And you mentioned culture there. This is kind of a question to both of you. So maybe we'll go to Scott first of all. What are the cultural factors within an organization that amplify or mitigate human risk?
So Javvad talks about the blame and punishment culture. I'd say enough to say on, there's a lot more to say on that one. I think the two for me, the first would be that security is just an IT problem. It's just an IT team problem. When that's seen as a responsibility rather than everyone's job, you get some very dangerous assumptions, like someone else will catch this, or that's not my area, or they might be too busy. The users will say, well, I'm too busy for security training. It's a really siloed mentality, and it means that security controls are seen as an obstacle rather than protections. The second biggest thing for me, and I'm going to pick on C-suite here, so if anybody is C-suite listening out there, I think some executives believe they have exceptions. And that's, again, particularly dangerous when the boss might be demanding not to do or not take part in security policies and things like no MFA because it might be inconvenient. Universal admin access, ability to have override controls. It can sometimes send a message out to the wider organization that security doesn't really matter. And all you're really doing then is creating a privileged target who have often the worst security habits out of anyone at an organization.
Thanks, Scott. And Javvad, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's just starting again at that C-level or that leadership level. They really do set the tone for the rest of the organization. And I think it's really important that they share their stories. So even if they make a mistake, I think it's so important that if a CEO says, look, I got a call and I believed it was from IT and I nearly did this or I did do that, it has the impact of showing everyone that, hey, you're not alone. It could happen to anyone. And there is no negative repercussions for this thing happening. We're in this together. And I think that's where culture really begins from. And then there's the other side of building your security champions in your organization, if it's big enough, having people rewarded. So if people can see that there's a visible reward for doing the right thing, they will be more encouraged to do that. And it doesn't need to be like a big, like £500 Amazon gift card. It can be as simple as something like a leaderboard somewhere that gamifies the whole process, and that creates an environment. But I think also, we just need to show people how things are done. And sometimes it's really easy to talk about culture from behind a keyboard. Sometimes it's really hard to actually do it when it's physical or face to face. So sometimes many organizations will say, if you see a stranger in the office without a badge, go and challenge them. And that's great when it's in a policy. But when it happens in real life, people are like, well, what does challenge them mean? Do I rugby tackle them to the ground? Do I take a photo of them and send it to security guards? What is the process? So sometimes the culture part is showing people how it's done. And that in turn creates the behavior or the desired behavior, which is the secure behavior. And I'll tell you a really quick anecdote that I heard that sometimes restaurants use this trick. If you go for a work dinner and they say there's a group of 10 of you, they will put a table of 2 next to you. And what they'll do is when they finish their dinner, they'll bring the best, most magnificent looking desserts out for free for the table of 2. Because what they know is that the table of 10, they'll look over and say, they look fantastic. We'll have 10 of those, please. And it's a really subtle way of nudging people into doing the behavior that you want them to do. And it's a way of creating that culture where everyone's like, we go to that restaurant and the desserts are magnificent. And then you become known for the dessert restaurant. And we can use those sort of principles and apply it in an organization to become the security organization overall, or that organization that really does take security seriously. It doesn't just say it as a strapline after they've been breached.
Thanks, Javvad. I think I've fallen for that too many times at restaurants. It's probably why I'm always having dessert even when I didn't plan to. So following on from that, I think we'll go back to you, Scott. How can businesses then foster a culture that reduces risky behaviors without creating fear or micromanagement?
I definitely say ease of use, practical, usable security. Again, take a leaf out of Javad's book here. You want things in life that make it easier. And, we're all, I'm sure many of us here are suckers, and we might have an Alexa at home. And how easy it is now to say, ask that, Amazon, I need to buy, this. I need you to remind me of this. We want that ease. We want things to be easy. And that's the same. You need controls that are going to fit into the workflows rather than causing disruption to make sure they're being followed. Outside of, say, the security awareness training, it's things like password managers that will autofill single sign-on that reduces that login friction. And as Javvad has already said, a clear escalation path for any concerns. When it's convenient, the compliance will naturally rise. And then adding into that, it's definitely a continuous methodology around delivering the security awareness training. Don't just stick with annual compliance training, which goes through the normal stuff. It needs to be a regular cadence, but at the same time, it needs to be bite-sized for people not to get too disinterested in it. And more and more now, and this is what I love about the Know Before platform and a couple of other vendors that we work with as well, there's specific training tailored to roles within the business departments. You have specific developer training now. You have specific training for finance teams. So think about delivering it in that way, and you're keeping the user interested. That along with phishing simulations and then immediate teachable moments. So as Javvad said, if someone reports something, it's worth then saying, what could have been the risk to the business, what could have affected us, and then sending out a new, there is a business that we work with that sends out a newsletter on a weekly basis with some things that have happened across the organisation so people are aware. So yeah, consistent but easy at the same time.
Thank you, Scott. Javvad, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Scott nailed it. I think it's like that consistency and that ease of use. The more we can reduce friction, the better it is. And I think many security people come from a technology background. And so The thing with technologists is we often want to prove that we're right, and sometimes we do that at the expense of being helpful. And a great example, I think, is that we tell people choose an 18-character password, and they'll say, well, I think 8 characters or 12 characters is enough. I've never been breached. And then instead of understanding where they're coming from, what they're really saying, when someone says, I don't want to choose an 18-character password, what they're really saying is, I don't know how to remember an 18-character password. I've got way too many accounts to remember 18 characters for all of them. We interpret that as, well, they're saying 8 characters is good enough. So now let me pull out my chart to show them, if I plug your 8-character password into my password cracking tool, I can crack it within like 32 seconds. Whereas if you had 18 characters, it will take me 32 years. And we use that as a point of we're right and you're wrong. And this just creates that conflict. So rather than saying that, we should understand what people want and say, well, okay, how about a password manager? Like Scott said, single sign-on, reduce that friction, make it easier for people. And then you take away all those little obstacles that get in the way, and you create the behaviors where people are far more inclined to do the secure thing.
So then how is technology, would you say, changing how we actually manage that human risk? Go back to you, Scott. How would you say that that's sort of changing?
I've mentioned this already today on a different call, having attended an event this week, and it came up in quite a big proportion, that whole world. AI is, for me, now becoming, and we've had this, I'd say, knowledge in the industry that over the last 2 years, LLMs are being used a lot more at business in the 3 different ways, whether it is an agentic use, whether it is an assistive use, or whether it is an automation route. It definitely makes life easier, but it's also something that needs to be recognized as a risk. To point at something that, again, that I came across in the last couple of weeks, on a Reddit post, there was a senior developer that walked past one of his junior developers who, to try and make his life easier, had dumped the company's entire database into ChatGPT to try and optimize it. And he only caught that because he was walking past this junior developer at the time and managed to stop him from doing it. And there are more and more things we're seeing. We can certainly say that phishing has been targeted via LLMs, and we're seeing the first real attacks as well using AI in the real world, which, again, we've been talking about for a while. It's not actually happened, but there have been a couple of instances now. It's almost a data loss prevention issue when you're talking about the DLP factor, but it's actually now going to be about training your users on, okay, what to do, what not to do. It sounds very, very basic, but that's what it needs to be. In a more detailed environment, you would say the business now need to be responsible for, well, what are the AI tools that you are using? What are you using them for, and what are you putting into them? And again, training around what should you or what should you not be doing with those tools that are available to you. Not to mention, deepfake trading has started to appear on training platforms, actually looking at videos and images and saying, well, is that real or is that not? We go back all the way back to February last year, very well reported case of the bank in, I think it was Hong Kong, where someone pretended to be their CFO and convinced someone to give them over $25 million or some vast amount of money. So again, I think you need to start adding these into the normal phishing, the normal security awareness training programs to keep people aware. And I'd also say it's not just from a business perspective as well. In our own personal lives and family lives, I got asked this question at our Tech Summit by someone who was attending my session. He said, it's all good telling us as a business, but what should we be telling our families? What should we be telling our children to avoid? And I think that's something else that personally, in our personal lives, we need to adopt as well.
Absolutely. Javvad, what do you, sort of your thought on what, I know Scott's probably touched on quite a lot of what you would think there as well, but any other thoughts with regards to that?
Yeah. I think Scott's spot on with the AI portion of it. So it both sides, isn't it? It's on one side, we can use it for a lot of good stuff. Like we ourselves, we use AI to map out a lot of risky behavior that people do. We integrate with other tools, and what that does is it allows us to almost create personalized learning paths for every individual. So if you're the type of person that is plugging in USB drives versus someone that is going to a football streaming website whenever the match is on, or whether you just click on phishing links, you can then get personalized training, which wasn't possible before, because manually no admin has the time to go through however hundreds or thousands of employees they have to build out a personalized training path for them. On the other hand, to Scott's point, I think we need to understand the risks that are there with AI. It's how do we secure the input that we're putting in there? Because things like prompt injection or and those kinds of things are there. How do we detect any drift in the AI model? Is it especially if it's a public one you're using, is it being influenced by someone? Is it doing something that it shouldn't do? How do you inject policy into the outputs? How do you measure the outputs, and how do you inject policy at that point? So if you're at work, you want your AI to be such that there's some DLP functionality to stop you inputting personal data, but then you also need some policy in there to say, like, hey, if it's asking you for personal data, you can block that request to the user and ask it to rewrite it in a non sensitive manner. So there's a whole bunch of things I think we need to do. I think as we all get more and more used to using AI and an agent, I think the very nature of the workforce will encompass both people but also agents alongside. I think that will be one umbrella, because the agents will often act on your behalf, or they will try to be helpful and summarize stuff for you. I think I saw, and I know a lot of these big vendors, they have their own plans, which is roughly similar, but I think the big companies like Google and Microsoft or what have you, the vision kind of there is in a few years, when you log in, you won't have to log into your email and Teams and Slack and what have you, but you log on and there'll be one interface that says you received 20 messages on Slack, you received 5 emails, I've responded to these, I've archived those, and here's a summary of things that you need to provide to me so I can reply to the others. And that is great from a convenience point of view, if that happens, or once that happens. But we need to be really careful on how we build our path to there, because that could lead to a whole lot of other issues that we don't have today.
Thanks for that. Okay, so Javvad, this question is aimed just specifically towards yourself. So how does KnowBe4 support clients with human risk management?
So we have an entire platform dedicated to human risk management. We have, obviously, we're well known for our security awareness training content. We have all of that in there. We have all the just-in-time training. We call it Security Coach, which nudge people at the point where they engage in any risky behavior. We have tools for the admins. So when people do report suspicious phishing emails, they can easily triage them, and if it is an actual phishing email, they can actually turn that into a teachable moment too. They can say, well, okay, let's strip out the malicious links, let's replace them with something benign, and then send it out as a simulated phishing email to everyone in the organization to see how many people would have fallen for it had this been a mass phishing attempt. We have the email controls in place. We have like a cloud email security offering from our acquisition of Egress. And we also have some DLP capabilities built into email as well to prevent, say, someone sending an email to the wrong John Doe or what have you. So there's a whole stack of features there that all tie together for the same mission to reduce human risk. So if you haven't taken a look at it, or if you think that you took a look at the platform 5 years ago when it was only simulated phishing and some training, then you look at it, you're probably surprised as to how in-depth and feature-rich the whole platform is.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. So Scott, my next question to you, which regulations and frameworks require awareness training and human risk management, would you say?
Oh, the ever complex and ever evolving world of frameworks. I think I'll cover both the UK and the US, as I know this is going to go out to the wider world now. Starting on the UK/EU side, of course, Cyber Essentials. Now, there's a definition here in terms of it requires security awareness training, but it's really important to know the specific nature and the scope of the requirement. It's not a separate control, but on 5, which is around Control 5, which is the security update management. It requires that users are made aware of their security responsibilities. More specifically, they must understand the role in keeping software and devices updated, awareness of configuration and the secure configuration requirements, and then understanding of acceptable use of devices and accounts as well. There are other implicit training requirements throughout the framework that have expectations around staff to recognize the importance of applying updates promptly, understanding password security requirements, know how to report security concerns, following policies around acceptable internet use, and understanding their responsibilities regarding malware protection. On the plus side, so that's just going into the standard, you may have on the technical verification when you do the audit, an assessor may ask you about user awareness training during the interviews. You may need to demonstrate that users understand those policies, and evidence of communication about the security responsibilities helps as well. However, I would say it's nowhere near as rigorous as, say, the ISO 27001 regulations in terms of that requirement. Again, on the UK-EU side, there are two that I'd like to talk about. GDPR, it's been around now since 2018, but in Article 32, the security of processing requires awareness raising. DPO, or data protection officers, need to monitor compliance through training, and they also must ensure that any personnel that are processing that data are under confidentiality obligations, and it needs to cover the other areas such as data subject rights, what happens if there is a breach response, or how you respond to a breach, and obviously privacy principles. Moving over to the US side, there is a whole lot more, I would say, that they've got a lot of different and stringent regulations. So healthcare, the HIPAA framework, that actually requires workforce security awareness and training programs. It needs to procedures for monitoring login attempts and reporting any disclosures, and then training on password management, malware protection, and then your breach response, plus documentation when it's all completed. PCI DSS covers kind of both us and the US, but payment card industry data security standard, if you want to break it apart from the abbreviation, and implementing formal security awareness programs. Annual training becomes mandatory for all personnel, cover every end user technology. Again, sticking to the US, the NIST framework, which is the Cyber Essentials track, is very similar in a way, but it is a lot more detailed. In some of the sections there, in the core category, probably going to get this wrong, I think it's PR.AT, that says that all users have to be trained. The users need to understand roles and responsibilities, and also, I think this is sort of supply chain, actually managing that risk, third-party stakeholders, understanding the roles and reporting processes as well. There's one that's coming and one that already exists in the EU, which is the NIS2 framework. And having just mentioned supply chain, be remiss if I didn't talk about it. This is putting a lot more onus on anybody in critical supply chains, such as telecoms, gas, electric, transport networks, on a minimum level of requirement. That is the CAF framework that has been designated by the UK body National Cybersecurity Council, government-backed body. And we are very much replicating that in the UK with something called the Cybersecurity Resiliency Bill, which is almost a carbon copy template. And there is something in the CRSB. This also covers managed service providers as well. I forgot to mention that. The security awareness training, again, must be documented and must be proven, and again, around the response capabilities. Overall of that, outside of frameworks, the other area that you can definitely consider as needing cybersecurity awareness training is if you're going for a cyber insurance policy. A lot of the underwriters and those companies that provide those are saying if you want the maximum level of cover, you need to be doing active cybersecurity awareness training and again proving that you're doing that, whether you're doing it for an outside consultancy or you're using a solution in-house. And I'm sure these will start to, security awareness training will start to filter down to a lot of the others. The other one, which again, having mentioned AI, would be the EU AI Act, and actually it's very much emerging, that one, and it's these requirements for AI system operators and then staff training on AI risks and limitations and awareness of AI specific threats. So that's very much an emerging policy. I wouldn't be surprised again if the UK has their own version of that in the future. AI, referring to the government, was talked about a lot, and the investment in that area in the budget this week. So again, it's great having the investment, but again, there still needs to be that control and regulation of that part of the industry to make sure it doesn't become a massive risk to businesses.
Perfect. Thank you, Scott. Okay, we've come to the last question now of the podcast before we wrap up. This question goes out to both of you. So I think we'll start with you, Javvad. What's one piece of advice that you could give to organizations that are starting their human risk management journey?
Oh, that's always a fun place to start from, isn't it? I'll say figure out what your biggest risks are. And I say that because not every organization is the same and not all of your risks are the same either. And so surprises me still how many organizations I speak to and they talk about in wanting to embark on a human risk management journey. And human risk management isn't like here's where you start, there are 5 steps, and here's where you end. You can start at any one point, really, in reality, and you can expand out from there as far as you need to go. But you need to know what is your highest risk. So I'd say if your biggest risk, for example, is, let's say, insider threats. We're really worried. We've had like 3 employees in the last year. They've tried to, sell secrets, or they try to take stuff that doesn't belong to them, or what have you. Well, let's start with an insider threat management program as part of your HRM. There's no point in doing simulated phishing trainings or giving awareness content if your biggest threat is malicious insiders, because they probably know that they shouldn't be doing it. They're doing it for other reasons. So let's get some monitoring in place and what have you. Similarly, if your biggest threat is the volume of phishing emails that are landing in your user's inbox, okay, let's look at email controls to how to reduce that before. Otherwise, it's just an uphill battle of let's just train people and what have you. So I'd say the first thing is just, like any risk, figure out what your high risk areas are. And then there's always a tool that you can buy. But first look at the processes and look at just the human side of that, how you can, and oftentimes you can actually reduce considerable amount of risk just by re-architecting a few things, or just by explaining to people the damage that can be done. And obviously then there's platforms like ours that can help you manage that and make that an easier process. But you really just need to see, benchmark where you are, what your high risks are, and that way you can actually see the progress you've made over time as well.
Absolutely. Scott?
Yeah, this was something I wanted to put this into the Build a Fortress webinar we did along with the presentation I did at our tech summit, but it would have meant me talking for another half hour, so I've had to condense this down to do the last question. It's something called making it safe to fail forwards. It's about the biggest barrier, as Javvad has already said, to human risk management. It's not the lack of technology or the budget, it's the fear. It's the fear that stops people from reporting that suspicious email they clicked, maybe sharing the password with a colleague to meet a deadline, or even raising questions about a trusted vendor or a trusted customer that you work with's unusual request. It's speaking up about the security practices that don't make sense as well. And what that means in practice is day one, set that expectation. We all will have security incidents. When they happen, it's learning from them together. The job isn't to be perfect, it's to notice when something feels wrong and to tell someone about it quickly. And then it's demonstrating it. The first person who might click on that phishing simulation, as Javvad said, gets thanked publicly, not shamed. And then when someone admits the mistake, the response is, thank you for telling us that immediately. That's exactly what we need. Let's fix this together, and sharing those stories of near misses. I always go back to a great story I heard at an event around Southwest Airlines in the US, where one of the executive team there, I think he was a CEO, actually had a board in their head office which had people's mistakes and what they'd made. And it was about, they put it up there because it's about learning from them. And you have to ask, well, why does that come first? Well, you could have the best training program money can buy. You can have all the state-of-the-art controls. You may have comprehensive policies that cover every scenario. You may have ISO 27001 certification. Even say you might have a security team 24/7. But if the people don't feel safe reporting concerns, you're left very, very blind. Speed of reporting is everything. Keep your people interested. Reinforce the behaviours, the good behaviours that happen. And while I'm saying, okay, show the mistakes, but that should be used as an education piece, not a stick to beat someone with to say that they've done something wrong.
Well, look, thank you both for sharing those great insights and tips today. It's clear that managing human risk is really important for businesses and data security. For those listening to today's podcast, thanks for tuning in. If you've got any questions for our guests, you can email us at info@greymatter.com. Again, today I'd like to thank Scott and Javvad for their time today. It's been very informative. And if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to our podcast now. Until next time, thank you.